Hey everybody, I'm back. This time I actually have a working camera instead of one that I was holding, but I still have the same old script. I thought we would film another update video on how the SuperLongboard is coming along. I've got Johan here to help me out with running the machine because he's been great at helping me test and finding bugs with the firmware and stuff like that. So I'm gonna run you through what's happened between the last video that I filmed and this one. We're gonna actually have some cool things that we can show you in terms of the machine moving around and doing some fun stuff, because in the last video, I didn't have anything set up. I was just kind of telling you that it could do stuff. And then I'm gonna be answering some of your questions and giving you some more information about how the SuperLongboard will be launched out, because we've got a plan for that now. So just a brief overview. Since I made the last video, we've gone through much more extensive laser testing to get more confident feeling about the laser output. I actually have some demos here that I'll show you later on. We've made some quite a few improvements to small bugs we found in the firmware. If you guys remember, this is the Gerbil HAL firmware that we're trying to, it already exists pretty well, like pretty solidly, but we're trying to build it up to do even more than the existing Gerbil HAL firmware can do. And we're trying to make it work specifically for the hardware we have here. So there's been a couple bugs of like motor driver plugin that we're writing where sometimes it would change, you know, the axis movements, or sometimes it would lose steps on a pause or something like that. We found a way that we could speed up Ethernet connections on the board. We've started the production of the next batch of prototypes. So this is our third batch that we're making. I talked about it in the last video that there was some hardware-based stuff that we just wanted to make sure we were really solidly good on. And this next batch is actually the biggest batch of prototypes we're making. We're making 40 of them so that we can do a whole lot of testing here. We're still working with Expatria, as you guys know, so they'll be able to do some testing out in BC, and then we can distribute them to another wave of beta testers. We also started the 4th axis testing, which we're going to demo some today. And we are homing in on the machine defaults that we're going to be using for the best compatibility with the long mill hardware, in compatibility with the new SuperLongboard. So that's kind of like the less demo-y stuff, but I hope that gives you a bit of an oversight on how things are going. And we're going to hop into doing some demonstration. So basically, some of the things we wanted to show you today is how we've got some faster movement on the machine. We've got some cool status light feedback and some other I/O that we can control. So we're gonna start off with a homing sequence so you guys can see what the homing sequence looks like on the new SLB. But the cool thing that this is allowing us to show is just that the speed of the machine is kind of improved. You can see how much faster it's able to home now. With the same limit switches, this is a stock long mill Mark II, so we haven't done anything to the machine. This is just new electronics. The next thing we're going to show is just some faster jogging. So you can see this is the new default jogging that we're finding works well with the machine. And you can see while we're jogging, this is kind of like a status LED strip that we've got set up. There's usually one on the board. This board, it's broken. So we've got some breakout ones here. And you can see how it changes color as the machine status changes. So it's like white when it's not moving at all, it's green when it's jogging, it's green when we're gonna run a job, which you'll see later. It turns blue when it's homing, and it's got other sort of status lights set up so that you guys can kind of get information about what your machine's up to. This was a new thing that I haven't seen on any other machines, maybe some 3D printers, and I kind of wanted to introduce it to the SLB because I thought it would be a nice addition to for people to be able to see what's happening with their machine, maybe from a bit more of a distance away. Like, you know, we don't want you to run your machine unattended, but if you're just like across the room checking something out, then the lights turn red, let's say, then you know an alarm has happened. And so you can kind of run back over to the machine and see something's happened. Oh, Johan just turned on the alarm there by hitting the E-stop. So that's what's going on with the new status buttons there. This is not our final E-stop. This is kind of a jerry-rigged E-stop that I showed in the last video. I don't have a new one to show you guys, but we do have some really cool looking E-stops that I might show in an upcoming video. But you can see that I've kind of jerry-rigged these 3 buttons on here. And these are the new macro buttons that we're supporting. They're customizable. And basically they allow you to load in whatever G-code you'd like or run you know, other custom functions.
Can you point it again?
Yeah, it's right here. And so I'm gonna show you what some of these have already been set up for. So this one, we set it up to, imagine you're running a job and the cutting head is kind of in your way and you wanna be able to swap the material out, then you can just press this and it's gonna move it out of the way for you. And then let's say you finished, changing all this stuff around, and then you want to bring the head back to you. Then I set this button up to bring it back to your 0 point, so you can go check it out and maybe run it again. So that's pretty cool. And then this third one actually shows off another one of the features of the board that I was talking about. It's these customizable, what we're currently calling switch banks that are up here. And right now what we've done is we've hooked one of them up to an LED strip that's under the table. And so when I press the button, it's gonna go and it's gonna turn on those LEDs. Ta-da! So obviously you can hook that up to a vacuum system or a spindle or whatever other accessory that you might want to be using with your machine. And these functionalities that I'm showing you are all completely customized for this specific demo that we did today. But the nice thing about these buttons is you can get them to do anything you want. So you can kind of think about it about how on the old longboard we had 3 buttons on the board. But we've kind of moved those buttons away from being on the board to being on the e-stop instead, so you can place them remotely wherever you place your e-stop. And also, instead of having fixed functionality, they now have configurable functionality. So that's all actually changed through the same firmware settings that you would use to change things like your machine travel, or if you're turning homing on and off, or whatever else. So most people that already have a long mill or has used any other Gerbil-based machine would be familiar with going in and changing those values. And that's also where you set these up. So it makes it pretty straightforward, I think. Another thing that we wanted to show off was, so because we're using like a faster processing speed MCU on our board compared to the Arduino Uno MCU, what we've noticed is that it's able to be more responsive because of the clock speed that it runs at. It's able to be more responsive to inputs. So you probably noticed for the homing it's faster because it's actually touching off the limit switches much more quickly. But that also applies to probing off a touch plate. And so where did we put the, oh, here it is. So Johan set this up beforehand, but we're just gonna demo the Auto Zero touch plate, which is the touch plate that I'm sure lots of you guys already have and enjoy using. You can move it to the right. Yeah. Move it down some more. Yeah, that looks like it's about in line. So you can come in close. And if any of you are familiar with the typical probing speed, I think you might notice that it's a little bit faster than usual. So you'll see it's gonna touch off the sidewall very quickly. We don't actually have to have it sit at the edge of the material for as long anymore because it's able to get that reading almost immediately off of the touch plate. Just like that. So that's pretty cool as well. Let's see. Well, I kind of already did this one, but the light toggling that I was showing you, there will be, like, obviously we're gonna come out with more documentation so you guys have more to read through in the next week or two. But the explanation is basically we've got some of these, as I was calling them, switch banks here. And what you can do is 2 of them are set up to basically act as a digital switch. So you can run a power supply through it to whatever accessory you're wanting to power, and they will switch that accessory on and off. And the other 2 act as basically voltage out, like a power out. So as opposed to like a digital signal, like the previous longboard had, where it was putting out just 5 volts at a couple, I think it was like 50 or whatever milliamps, like a small amount of milliamps. These ones are able to put out like 250 milliamps at 24 volts to power more stuff for you. So we're kind of utilizing those to run whatever functionality that we want to kind of expand the capabilities of the machine. And we're honestly not sure exactly how people are going to use it, more that we wanted to work hard to set up reasonable customizations to run these, to then see how people would use it, so that we can kind of iterate maybe in the future about what we can and can't support down the line just with firmware updates. And the great thing about these outputs is that you can actually customize what activates those outputs. So you can use the spindle or the coolant commands like the M7, the M8. You can use spindle commands, and each of them actually has their own custom M command if you want to use a completely separate command that you want to use to run them. So I don't know if I think the LED's probably hooked up, right? Yeah, these ones and those ones and this one. They're all just kind of being turned on and off. You can see Johan is just using the simple like mist and flood buttons in G-Sender to turn everything on and off. So, and we just have little pin selectors in here so that you can decide what command runs those switch bank outputs. So I think that shows off to you guys, what have we covered so far? We've covered motors, limit switches, the status LEDs. We've got the new e-stop with the customizable buttons. We've got the switch banks. So I think after this, we're going to be moving on to kind of the spindle and laser support. That's all kind of happening up in this top area. So I'm going to be showing you guys, basically what we have hooked up here is we actually have 3 different like laser spindle outputs. So we've got a quote unquote laser hooked up. You can see the wires are plugged in, but we're not actually going to run it. So instead we have kind of some like LEDs over here that are like pretend laser is on. It's working. We would all have to be wearing safety glasses for safety purposes. And then we've got a spindle setup here, which is actually hooked up to 2 separate VFDs. You can kind of, if you come down here, you can see we've got one here and one here. And one of them is actually taking in, yeah, we've got one here and we got one here. And one of them is taking in an RS-485 input and the other one is taking in a 5-volt PWM input, because we have effectively 3 different ways to communicate to these sort of analog outputs, because a laser can be modulated on and off and so can a spindle. And the RS-45 is like, it's a Modbus over RS-45 communication protocol that we set up to work with the VFD. So work your magic, Johan. I want to raise it up a bit higher. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, this is pretty cool. You can see how it turned itself on and it's running the process, and this is running through RS-45, right?
You can show the individual like RPMs. I can spin it up to.
Oh yeah. I don't know if the camera could see it.
You can like.
It's this one running RS-45, right? Okay. There we go. And then we went down by a single RPM. Nice. And then we're turning it back off. So the amazing thing about the RS-45 is that we can basically tune the interval between the min and the max. So you can get exact like 1 RPM control over the spindle, which is really amazing. And the other thing I'm excited about, the reason why we wanted to put in the RS-45, like the Modbus over RS-45, is you can use it not just to control spindles, but down the line it can also be used to control other more industry equipment. There's a lot of equipment that gets controlled over RS-45, or we could make our own accessories that are able to talk to the board over RS-45. You can basically daisy chain the accessories on and on and on, and they all just keep talking to each other and communicating back to the main board. So that's really cool. And then we're gonna switch over to the laser, right?
Yep.
So while Johan's doing that, I'm just going to show you guys some of the laser demo pieces we've done. So one of these was done on the longboard, and one of these was done on the super longboard. I don't know if you can tell the difference. We've been basically just pushing our best to make sure that there's ultimate compatibility for the laser beam between the two different boards. So you can see that this above here was actually the longboard, and this one down here was the super longboard. And the outputs basically look the exact same. Now there is one cool thing, is that the difference between these two is that the super longboard, even though it's got the same level of quality, and in some cases I would say better level of quality, it actually is able to engrave these even faster than the longboard can, because of the new way that the super longboard is able to process laser moves in particular. So we're gonna show you with a laser demo file that Johan's gonna load up, how when you're running it, it basically goes from jittering movements that it would normally be using to make the tiny little moves when you're engraving the file. And then it's gonna switch over to now being basically just smooth back and forth movements for engraving. So he's loaded up the file up here.
So this is laser mode off.
So this is gonna be the laser mode off on the machine. Paolo, you can come over here, and you're gonna see when it's running it without the new like SLB feature of smoothing out the laser features, how normally running a file would look. So if you get in kind of close here, you can see how when it's going and it's doing the engraving, you can imagine when it's doing these tiny little segments here, it's having to make tiny little movements because each movement is at a different power level as you're engraving it. So you're having all these really discrete movements to make those different power level movements. Okay, so I think we can stop the job there. And now Johan's gonna switch it over to the laser mode that we have set up on the super longboard, which is supported by Gerbil HAL, to show how the movements change when you're in the officially supported laser movement. Oh, that's all right. Homing again.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
I don't know what happened. Okay, let's do it.
Yeah, we can just zero here and run it. Okay, you can come in close again. Ta-da! So this is how, with the new laser movements, you're able to do laser engraving much faster, because you can see it's, Gerbil HAL is basically able to recognize that all of those individual movements you're making are actually all in the same direction. And so it's turning them from single movements in the same direction to just one long movement in the same direction. And it's pulsing the laser on and off at each segment still, but it's allowing the machine to kind of keep the momentum going back and forth instead of having to make individual jerky movements. So there we go. What else are we moving on to? Laser. Yeah, I showed that stuff. Okay, fourth axis stuff.
I'll move it away, but just give me a second to...
As you guys remember, we got the Vortex rotary axis here. Okay, so with the fourth axis, basically, as you guys are aware, on the longboard, because we didn't have the ability to control any extra drivers, we had this little switch that we set up here. And that switch allows the output from the y-axis to change over to the rotary axis, so that you can basically center the y-axis over the rotary axis, switch them over, and then start cutting on the a-axis. The great thing about the SLB is that we actually have built into it, technically it's a fifth motor output. It's not a built-in motor driver. So you can see here, this has actually been hooked up to this external stepper motor driver. I'll come out with details at a later date about how we're gonna be supporting the rotary axis for the SLB, but this is the setup that we're using right now. And what this allows us to do is, because we haven't switched the y-axis over to the a-axis, we actually have full control over the y-axis and the a-axis at the same time. And that allows you to do what's actually truly fourth axis cutting, not just rotary axis cutting. And so Johan's actually set up a file on here for full fourth axis cutting. and you can see it's working in vCenter as you'd expect. And he's just gonna run the file so that you guys can see a close-up of the rotary axis, the x-axis, the z-axis, and the y-axis, all moving in unison to make, you know, the cut the way it's supposed to be cut. So yeah, you can run it. You can come on in, check it out. You can see how it's rotating here and it's moving back and forth and up as it's carving. See how it's moving around up here? And I'll show you what the final result of that looks like. This is just a, you know, a quick demo that we put together, but you can come in close here. Something that I can show you is how if you were to cut this on a rotary axis, these inside walls, for instance, normally if you only had the bit coming from above when you're cutting it, then the only way you'd be able to cut those walls is at an angle. Like you couldn't cut down straight at them because they're not along the center line of the material. But because we have the ability to move in the A-axis and the rotary axis at the same time, that's what's allowed the cutting tool to actually go straight down and make a straight wall on the inside. Because you can fake straight walls on outsides, but not on insides. And this basically is gonna allow people to be even more creative in how they wanna use their Vortex and be able to create much more true 3D objects with less limitations on their carving. So we're very excited about that. And as I mentioned at the start of the video, that's something that we recently have put into the firmware. And with just a couple bug squashes, it already seems like it's working quite well. So I'm very excited about that. And I think the last thing we're gonna demo is just quickly, so all of the stuff we've been showing has been communicating over USB to the board. And we're actually going, yeah, this is the cable here. And what we're actually gonna be doing is we're gonna be taking out the USB and putting in Ethernet and then just running maybe the exact same 4th axis job again, but over Ethernet so that you guys can see that it is like a one-to-one thing as a good alternative for communication to your board if you're finding that USB cable isn't working how you want it to. And we'll have instructions and documentation later on about how this is gonna be hooked up and stuff like that so that you guys can get it working on your SLB when it comes time for launch. So yeah, I don't know. Do you wanna, where's the Ethernet? Oh, here it is. So I'm just gonna plug this in the back side here. Okay, I think that's in. And then you can come and check it out up here. So we have the ability to do Ethernet connection up here. And you can see, chaos! The rotary axis is still in the way.
I forgot I cannot hold.
Yeah. That's all right, we'll just move further back and just run the job.
Yep.
Yeah. But yeah, you can see the switch is as easy as that. We just disconnect from the USB, we connect with the Ethernet, and now you're able to communicate to the machine over Ethernet. And yeah, we're just gonna like jog around and run a job and stuff like that so you can see what that looks like.
Oh, it's all of a sudden very slow.
Ah. Okay. It might be a little bit buggy, perhaps.
It's the first time I've seen this.
You wanna just power cycle it?
Yeah, that'd be good. Okay. Finding bugs live, eh? Let's try this again. Yeah,
Okay.
looks fine. Okay.
So this is the stuff that we're gonna be still working through over the next month or two, because as I was saying, there's a lot of things interacting with different other things on this new board. Things that you wouldn't think impact each other, like who's to say if the code that's making the macro buttons work can somehow interfere with how the Ethernet works. And so we just kind of keep testing, we keep running real world cuts and stuff like this on the machine, and we set it up for the beta testers. So we talk to them and we see if they're running into problems running their machines. And then that's what enables us to see if we find any of these other weird behaviors and then make improvements. You can see that we're running the same 4th axis file again, and it's running the same up there. And there's no USB connected anymore, so this is all running over the Ethernet in the backside. Cool. Well, I think that about concludes the demo side of things for today. Showing you guys sort of some of the new fun features that I'm excited about, at least for the SuperLongboard. I'm sure what we're going to be planning to do is, like, I've already got a lot of documentation for the beta testers so that they get to see how to use and configure all these features as it is today. And that will kind of be rolled into the documentation and will be rolled into some other videos we might make in the future, showing kind of these live demos that we've done here, but in shorter segments so that you guys can get a better understanding of how to configure it to set that feature up, or what your options are to choose from out of the features that are available. So I can show you that at a later date. The last thing that I do have to physically show you is the enclosure here. Ta-da! So this is basically the finalized enclosure we're going to use for the machine. I had to sand this acrylic, but this is actually going to be frosted acrylic. And you can see it looks very similar to the enclosure that's on the machine right now. The idea basically being, as I mentioned in my previous video, that you can put a bracket in the backside here in order to mount it on the Y-axis rail. For Mark II machines, for Mark I machines, we don't have any on-rail compatibility. I don't know if we'll come out with any or if it'll just be not possible, so I haven't looked into that yet. But for every other machine that isn't a Mark II long mill, you still have these flanges on both sides that'll allow you to screw it down to any flat surface. And we've made sure to design the board in a way that it works in both configurations. By the way, all these wires are just here for me to test how the wires come out of the enclosure. This is like a representative of how you'd set the machine up. So that's all that's going on there. Yeah, and it has some fun features for kind of like sliding and opening it up and then having access to the inside, having access to the plugs you'd use most commonly on the front and back side, as well as having plenty of space in cable holders so that your wiring stays intact when you open up the front, and then being able to just slide it back in place. And now it's kind of all secured and ready to go. The nice thing is, as well, is this one doesn't have a working status light in the board, but it's just because we kind of broke it. But normally you would have a light here, and when that light is on, you can actually see that shine through the acrylic on the front side, so that's pretty cool too. So that's basically the finalized enclosure. Now that the enclosure design is finished, we're getting samples made for all the parts for the enclosure, and those should be coming in by mid-December, I think. The e-stop design, as I mentioned earlier, is still in progress. We're getting pretty close on deciding how we want that to be, and I'm sure by the time we come around to launching, you'll be able to see what that looks like. But it's basically just like the big button that you can hit, the oops button, right? And then the remaining buttons for customization. Yeah, we're still chasing firmware bugs. That'll probably be a process that we're more focused on for the next couple weeks into mid-December, where I feel pretty confident that by then we'll have found most of them. We have, as I said, the new board, the round of prototype boards we're having made, 40 of those. And once those come in, we're gonna have to double check that we didn't miss anything on those, or if we have to make any other follow-up tweaks, but ideally they should be good to go. And that would then lead us into the last wave of beta testing that's gonna begin around mid-December. That would allow us to start to, redistribute the new batch of prototype boards to the existing beta testers, but also reach out to some new beta testers that specifically have static or EMI problems, or they are looking to upgrade what their machine can do so that they can try out some of our new I/O that the SLB has to offer, so that we can get better feedback on that and put any final tweaks we need, throughout the month of January. Around that point, we'd be aiming to order the boards, and at that point, everything else should be ordered. And so that means that the production and the design of everything else except the board should be finalized and ready to start happening near the end of December. And then the board, depending on if we find any other bugs or any other tweaks we want to make, that'll probably start to be sent out sometime around January. That kind of is the last steps that we're going to be covering to put the board into production. And that's going to kind of lead into launching this board. So we're basically at the point where we're feeling very confident about the SuperLongboard. You guys can see it running. You can see that we've ironed out most of the bugs. We've got it working with G-Sender for the most part, and we've got the beta testers running with them as well. So we're kind of, feeling like we're moving pretty well here. We're kind of on track to put this out. And so, so basically we want to announce a launch date for it, which is going to be December 4th. And on that day, I'm also going to be doing a live stream to go along with the launch so I can answer any other questions, but I'll come back around to that later in a sec. Basically how we want to roll this out is we realize there's interest in the SuperLongboard. We realize that existing owners would like to get their hands on it, and people who are interested in getting into the longmill ecosystem want to get their hands on it. And so what we've decided to set up is a sort of a pre-launch for you to get your hands on the board, a pre-order system. And that is going to cover from from December 4th until the end of January. And for that pre-launch or pre-order period, we're going to be selling the boards at $170 each, which is Canadian, and then $126 US approximately. And that's going to come with the board and the entire enclosure and the e-stop and everything to get you up and running. And then basically after that pre-order period is over, it's going to be, the price is going to go up to $220 Canadian / around 165 US. Basically the way we want to do this is because we're using it to kind of gauge interest. We want to see what people think about the board, how many people are actually interested in picking it up for either their existing long mill or a new long mill when they're trying to get into the ecosystem of CNC machines that we offer. And it also is going to help us to kind of like work with scale a little bit on the production, because right now we kind of feel like we might order maybe like 500 boards at the start, but if we get a whole bunch of orders in the next, like from the time we launch to the end of January, we get maybe like 200 or 300 orders in, then maybe we can bump up the amount of production we go through. So we really hope you guys can kind of put your money in when you want to pick it up, or you can wait until later. But the way we're going to be laying it out is basically, if you get it now, the price will be lower. If you wait a little bit, the price will be a little bit higher, but not that much higher. And then if you wait until later, when we're going to plan to eventually include it by default with the machine, at that point in time, we'll probably be increasing the price of the machine to encapsulate all the new features, as well as some of the other price increases for manufacturing the long mill. So it doesn't really, or we're trying to make it so that it doesn't really matter when you get it, that you'll still get the benefits from it. And also, we're just trying to get our board out there. We feel like we're really excited about it, and we feel like other people will be really excited about it too. If any of that, your eyes glazed over, we'll be writing it out in the blog that we're posting either like shortly or when we get closer to the live stream as it goes out, so that you guys can have it as a point of reference. But just so you guys know, if you know our company, we try not to put sales out. We try not to encourage people to buy things using like any sort of marketing tactics. We try to have things speak for themselves. And we feel very confident about the SuperLongboard. We feel like there's a lot for it to offer. And we feel like for the price, it's a really good deal. And as I mentioned in the last video, we've put over $300,000 in R&D into this board. And so we try to find the best line that we can to put out stuff that we think people like, and make sure that we can kind of keep going as a company so you guys can support the things that we're doing. So if you have any questions about pricing, you can let us know, but that's what our current plan is. And at the time of launch, if we end up having a link that you can click, we'll put it in the description of this video so that you can go click through and find any blog post or any live stream or anything like that. So now I'm going to go into a little bit of a frequently asked questions segment, so I can sort of see if I can answer any of you guys' questions before you need to ask them, based on some questions we've already got. So the first one we thought is the SuperLongboard going to work with your existing long mill? The answer to that is yes. As you can see, this is a completely stock long mill. I don't know if you can see it, but it's the one we were just demoing on. It's a completely stock long mill Mark II. You just plug in all the plugs for the motors, you plug in all the limit switches, and basically it's like plug and play. The firmware editing is the same as in the past. So if we don't, like, we'll probably have profiles for our machines, but you can just go in and tweak like anything that you might need to tweak. But it's the SuperLongboard by default is being set up so that it supports the Mark II machine by default. So you shouldn't, if you have a Mark II, you shouldn't need to change anything. If you have a Mark I, you can just tweak a couple things or turn on homing or whatever. And that's the way we want to do it. We're trying to make it as backwards compatible as possible, all the way down to probably the first long mill we ever shipped out. Another question is, will it come default with the long mill in the future? As I said, the plan is to eventually do that, to phase out the old longboard once we are feeling like super confident about the super longboard and make the super longboard be the newest board. I think this does the best job of enveloping our goals as a company, because we found ways to kind of make this new board in a way that there was some inefficiencies with the old board. So not only is it like reasonably still price effective, but also it's bringing way more features to the table. And I think it's going to allow us to expand into the future with what we want to offer to our customers. So I'm hoping that the super longboard can continue to kind of build on features into the future. Can the SL be used on a non-long mill machine like any other CNC? And I would say for most hobby CNCs, yes. We've actually, one of our beta testers is running the SLB on a Onefinity. And one of the things that he really likes about it is he likes the price point, he likes the customizability, he likes the ability to use like software that's less locked into an ecosystem, which we naturally try to make our stuff more open source and compatible with other options. The basic things that you would need to make sure that the super longboard is compatible with your hobby machine is that the max voltage for this is 24 volts. So if you're running anywhere up to like a NEMA 23, that can run, like the drivers can run up to 2.8 amps per motor coil, per winding. And so anything that's kind of set up to use that, you should be good to go. It uses basic limit switches, it uses basic other inputs and outputs. We use a lot of terminal connectors on it so that you can just screw things in and out. You don't have to crimp anything. So there's a lot of benefit there. And also the way we kind of envision the super longboard is like an all-in-one solution. So in basically the vast majority of cases, you can just buy this board, get set up with it, and it can already support a lot of the stuff you'd want to do out of the box, even if it's a more custom machine. It doesn't have support for closed loop steppers, it's just open loop steppers. Was there anything else? Yeah, I think if you look at the super longboard when it comes out and you compare it against other control boards that exist on the market for other hobby CNC machines, like if you're kind of making your own setup and you're wanting to pick and choose, I think the things that'll stand out to you for the super longboard outside of the other boards that are available on the market is just the built-in motor drivers. A lot of them you have to get separate ones. So it's like, if you prefer to have separate ones, then this probably isn't the board for you. And if you want something that's more all-in-one, then this is going to make your setup and your usability of your own CNC machine much easier. And also just the openness of the inputs and outputs that you can use for different control use cases. It's open source so that you can go in and you can tweak the firmware if you want. You can tweak, you can not even buy the board from us. You can make the board yourself if you really want to. And we're going to be putting out all the documentation on this so that you can make whatever customizations you'd like to it, or we'll do that to the best of our abilities. And also, I think the combination of reliable USB sending, Ethernet sending, and other features that we plan to support in the future will make for the best all-around board experience. It's the one that we imagine that would be best for the average hobby CNC. As far as the open source stuff, we'll be coming out with that as soon as we can after we've launched and we're feeling confident about it, so you can keep your eye out for that. How big is the super longboard? I don't know, this big. I don't have exact measurements for it, but it's pretty portable. It's quite thin, pretty portable. You can see it fits just on the side of the rail of this machine. And most of the plugs happen on the inside with just a couple on the front and back for power or Ethernet input, or like the e-stop or probing output. Will the board have support for automatic tool changing? I haven't confirmed it yet, but there are plenty of additional I/O. That's actually one of the things that I feel like also stands out about the SLB in regards to it over other board options, which is that we've done extra work to put like more I/O rich, like the MCU that we're using has a lot of extra I/O on it. And we decided that that would be worth the cost because of the expansion into the future. And so it becomes less a question of like what can it support and more a question of what can't it support. Because realistically, you can, if you really wanted to dig in, you could remap some of the pin assignments and make it do almost whatever you want. We actually have an auxiliary header that runs a lot of spare inputs and outputs that right now they're not doing anything. So you can plug in and do whatever you'd like with those. Question, should I wait for the SuperLongboard to launch before I buy my long mill? As I said, I think that's up to you. Because we'll be probably increasing the price of the machine once we bundle the SuperLongboard with the long mill. You probably won't see much in terms of price savings. And the nice thing is like, even if you get the long mill as it is now, it's still a fully usable machine. And swapping out the electronics will not be a huge deal for you. And so I think it's probably worth your time and worth our time to just like, if you want to pick up a long mill, you should just do it, I think. Like we try not to make it so that we're like being secretive about what we're going to come out with or we're leaving people behind. We want everyone to have a great time using our machines. And so anything that we can do to help support that is what we're going to do. Yeah, how do we handle fourth axis? As I explained, it uses the fourth axis output to a separate driver. That driver is just like any typical stepper motor driver that uses step and direction and enable signals. So it's like very easy to hook up. In terms of supporting for the Vortex, as I said, we'll be coming out with a plan for that in the near future. But for the time being, that's just kind of the setup that we have that's working right now. Will we have the ability to have more than one sensor on the y-axis for auto squaring? There is an input for it. We have tested it. It seems like it's working. But because we're trying to squash as many bugs as possible and we're trying to focus on the features we think people will use more like near the start of the launch period, we decided to set it aside for the time being. But the plan is to have support for that in the future. And it's basically just as easy as adding a limit switch to the other side of the y-axis, and then now you can square it up. So that's pretty cool. Will the SLB have support for controlling other external drivers? Unfortunately, as it stands right now, probably not. We're actually communicating to the TMC drivers over SPI, not with step and direction signals. And the way the SPI has been configured is to communicate to those drivers in particular. And so we don't really have plans to have a breakout for that or anything like that. Now, this might kind of bum some people out, but I think it's something that we have to decide to do so we can kind of keep progress moving forward on making a board that people are going to be wanting to use and have easier setup for. Now, that doesn't mean that it's something we can't change in the future, and it's something that we can keep open for consideration. But the drivers we've chosen are really good drivers, and I think there's some other people might ask like what happens if a driver gets fried or anything like that. We've set them up to be over-spec'd for what we're using it for, so we're pretty confident that that should never be the case, that you'd run into problems with them. And actually, by attaching them directly to the board, we get much better heat sinking because the drivers are actually connected straight through into the copper planing of the board in order to have really great heat sinking right next to the drivers. I think the last question is just like, if you want to follow along, how do you do that? Just sign up for our blog posts. That's where we put the news out. You can follow along on our forum or our company Facebook page. That's where we post stuff about how the project's coming along. Yeah, and you can get emails straight to your inbox if you sign up for the newsletter on our website. Yeah, I think the last couple things I wanted to say was, first of all, if any of you are interested in the SuperLongboard, or you would like to help be a part of the community that's helping us to move forward to be ready for the launch of the SuperLongboard, it would be a huge benefit if you would give a shot at using the latest version of G-Sender Edge. If you're working on stuff that is like not super important or you're playing around or whatever, any feedback we can get on G-Sender Edge is appreciated. We've been working really hard on G-Sender Edge over the last year to build in support for the SuperLongboard. But what we don't know is if we change something to support the SuperLongboard, if that's somehow breaking something that supports the existing longmill. So anyone that has a current machine can go on there, they can use G-Sender Edge, they can use new features. We have like new joystick features we just released and some other stuff that you'll see that we posted about. So you get to use those new features and you get to play around with your existing machine and you get to tell us, is anything wrong? And then we can make sure that when it comes time to launch for the SuperLongboard, we have a new version of G-Sender we can release that supports both machines without any big issues. So that would be great. And yeah, just as a reminder, this is going to lead into December 4th live stream, where I'm going to be sitting down and answering people's questions, and we're going to be posting the live page so people can go and pre-order. So if you have any comments now that I didn't answer, leave them in the description of the video or wherever we post this on Facebook or anything like that, so that we can write them down and have them ready to answer right off the bat in the live stream. Obviously, you can still come into the live stream and ask questions too, but yeah, if you want to get your questions in now, you can. And yeah, outside of that, I guess I will see you guys in about a week.